everyone's having a lovely Wednesday evening wherever you guys are. And yeah, we're just gonna dive in, talk about amateur and its inception and development. So a general timeline for Ryan, and you can correct me if I leave out anything important, but in 2010, you launched No Film School, which is a huge website that provides resources to people who are cinephiles interested in film within the industry. And then 2011, your screenplay Man-Child, which now we know is amateur, was accepted into the IFP Project Forum and also selected for the Sundance Screenwriters Lab. And then same year, 2011, you had a Kickstarter campaign for Man-Child and you raised over $125,000, which is wild. And then in 2013, you made a short film for Man-Child that was called Amateur. And that won numerous film festival awards. It was a Vimeo staff pick, got a lot of traction. And then in 2018, Netflix released Amateur as the feature that hopefully you guys watched before. And if you haven't watched it, definitely watch it after this. So I say that to say that there was a journey, like an amazing journey for Amateur. And I was curious to know how it all began. And specifically knowing that you grew up in North Carolina and you played basketball. Can you talk a little bit more about your experience growing up and how that led to Amateur's development?
Yeah, for sure. Well, as you mentioned, I grew up in North Carolina, and North Carolina in basketball is kind of like Texas in football. I mean, it's really, Michael Jordan played there. I grew up between Duke and UNC, two of the biggest college basketball programs in the country. And so I grew up playing there, and that's really where my passion for the material came from, because I was on the court with some guys who were going to go pro in basketball. And I knew that was not going to be me. But I hope to go pro as a storyteller. And, they say, write what you know. And so Durham, North Carolina, where I'm from, there's more than a couple. Back in that time, there were several really high level high school basketball programs, which were far better than my team. But seeing that world from somewhat of a unique perspective, I think really made me want to explore it more. And I knew that I had such a passion for the sport that I wanted to tell a story set in that world. And there was something about, like my own team was half white, half black, and I was the one Asian guy on it. I think I was the only Asian guy in the entire conference, actually. So I had kind of like an outsider perspective on it. And the thing that I viewed, that I saw was like, why in these predominantly white sports where, whether it be gymnastics or swimming or golf, like why can you go pro as a teenager and get signed to sponsorships and make money, but in the two sports that are predominantly black, basketball and football, you're not allowed to do that? Like, why is that? And over time, I kept playing basketball and I love the sport. And so I just thought that maybe, I wasn't the right person to drive down the lane and dunk on someone, but maybe I could be the right person to explore that issue because of where I was from and what I grew up around and my passion for the sport. And also just the fact that my parents were like liberal academics who would look at these kids and say, like, why don't they go to college? Why didn't they get a degree? And I'd say, well, you're like a really liberal person. Why is it a bad thing that? So anyway, there were just a lot of things swirling around in my head that as a basketball player, when I kept playing the sport and I kept following it, that I thought, maybe a movie hasn't been told from the perspective of a kid experiencing those things. And that was why I wanted to explore it.
Got it. Yeah, and you definitely handled it with a lot of care because, as you mentioned, there are definitely racial dynamics that can be exploitative in these scenarios. And even when you were supplementing writing this in terms of research, did you ever go back to the different basketball players that you had played with in your youth, or how did you feel like you did more research, I suppose, to help create the script?
Yeah, I mean, my team wasn't very good, so most of us couldn't really speak about what it was like to be highly recruited. But we were fortunate and also the internet changed everything. Like YouTube mixtapes. These kids were getting recruited and discovered and publicized so differently. So my own experiences at a certain point, were not going to be instructive really anymore because I played so long ago and because I wasn't that great. So we were fortunate to have, other people as part of the project. I mean, Tony Parker, the NBA All-Star, and Michael Finley, the NBA All-Star, were executive producers. And I had sources as well, people who reported on things. At one point, I remember a source telling me about a FBI investigation into child trafficking in the world of basketball, but he was like, you can't tell anyone. And I was like, that'd be an interesting story. So it was definitely like a second wave of research once it was, since my own basketball playing career, as not great as it was more in the rearview mirror.
That's awesome. And clearly a lot of people were able to relate to that, considering the fact that you did raise so much money on Kickstarter for this story. Can you explain to everybody how you created your Kickstarter campaign and how you felt that you were able to crowdfund so efficiently, especially for your first feature?
Yeah, I mean, the campaign was just me. I didn't have anyone attached to the project at that point. And I think I had applied to IFP, but I hadn't been accepted yet. So it was this idea that I had that I just felt a personal connection to. And, part of the reason for the success was I had built No Film School. And so I put myself out there a lot and I had a big email list, but that really only got me, I think, probably halfway to the goal. And so then what was effective from there was having other people reach out on social media. And at a certain point, a couple of people in the NBA heard about it, and like Phil Jackson, the NBA coach with 11 rings, and his then girlfriend, Jeannie Buss, who's the executive of the Lakers now, like they saw it on Twitter and backed it.
Wow.
And then, so it was a very grassroots organic thing of sort of talking about the project and first reaching the No Film School audience, but then also reaching sort of a target audience for the film itself, which was the kind of the second half of the campaign.
Got it. Yeah, and it's interesting. I was thinking about it as well because when you had developed, from when you wrote the script to the film being released, social media had changed a lot from 2011 to 2018. And even within the film, you use a lot of, all the live streaming and everything. And I'm curious to know how that may have shifted throughout the years because it was such a huge part of tying together the entire story.
Gosh, it shifted a lot. To the point where I actually left social media to work on the film at a certain point, and then events in the world led me to not really want to come back because we shot it in 2016 and then the election happened and I felt differently about it. But no, I'm glad you talk about that because I ended up doing all those social media graphics myself because we didn't really have a budget for the animations. So I remember having to look and saying like, what does the Instagram animation look like now? Because I've been off of it for 2 years. No, I mean, one of the more rewarding parts of doing the film was there were things that I was trying to predict that hadn't happened yet, whether it was kids finding a way to not go to college and, go abroad and play, which I was told was never going to happen when someone read the script. And then it happened before the movie even came out. So things were changing both with social media and with amateurism and the NCAA. And I mean, social media obviously has only gotten larger. And I think at the time that I was writing it, most people weren't really taking it seriously because we hadn't seen things like the Russians hacking the election, right? Like it was a more innocuous thing. And then in the time that I was working on the movie, I think we all started taking it more seriously.
Yeah, for sure. And even backtracking now to the short that you made after you had raised the money for the feature, Amateur, on Vimeo. I'm curious as to what made you, in the short film, for those of you who may have not have watched, and I don't really want to spoil it either, it's pretty much the same premise where the student athlete is being sought after by another coach, a young Black boy in high school, being sought after by a coach who wants to take him to be professional. But the dynamics shift the power dynamics shift between the student and the coach. And then they shift again in the actual feature. So I'm curious to know what made you decide to shift that, because they were both pretty pivotal moments of each film.
Yeah, so the feature I'd been working on for a while when I made the short, and the short was supposed to be, I mean, things changed so much over the years that the short was originally supposed to be a prequel to
Mm-hmm.
the feature, and it's a different kid. You know, the kid in the short is an older high school kid, like a high school senior, and the
Yeah.
feature is about like an eighth grader.
Yeah.
So the short was supposed to be about a kid who knows better,
Right.
and the recruiter who's approaching him as a result of what happens in the short would then start going after younger and younger kids.
I see.
And
Got
I didn't tie them in explicitly because the character in the recruiting character in the short ended up not even being in the feature. So, but there was
it.
originally a very, it was almost like a, you know, it was a prequel by design, and it ended up being more of a standalone thing. But the interesting thing about that, I think, is a lot of people would make a short, and then if it turns out well, or if they get interest, can turn it into a feature. Whereas in this case, I had been writing the script, but I'd never
Mhm.
directed anything set in the world of basketball. So I
Sure.
decided to then make a short after I'd already been working on the script. So it was kind of an opposite order, but the short was so helpful. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I didn't get into the Sundance Lab until I'd made a short, and we, you know, getting like a state tax credit, you know, they had something to look at. Getting actors attached, they could see
Mm-hmm.
whether I could work with actors or whether I was familiar with the world of basketball. So the short
Mm-hmm.
was such a huge part of, you know, actually getting this idea made into a
Mm-hmm.
movie.
Yeah. No, yeah, definitely. And in the actual film itself, you have actors like Michael Rainey Jr., who is in Power, who plays the main character, Terron. And I'm always curious about casting for sports dramas, because I know that Michael played basketball and he was a basketball fan, but there's definitely a huge difference between being a fan of basketball and playing it versus having to convince everyone that you can be a professional basketball player. So I want you to, if you could let us know more about casting and how you're able to train all the different actors.
Yeah, we didn't know. We thought that we were either going to find a basketball player who never acted before and try to work with them on acting, or we'd find an actor who'd never played basketball before and then work with them on basketball. And there's a little bit of life imitating art where I couldn't cast a basketball player
Mm-hmm.
because I'd be ruining their NCAA eligibility if they were being paid to play basketball on screen. And then if they one day wanted to go to college, I would have potentially ruined that. So it would have been like a you know, snake eating its tail with like the
Mm-hmm.
movie ruining thing that the movie
Mm-hmm.
was about.
Yeah.
So in Michael's case, he'd been a point guard for his AAU team and played a lot of basketball. And I think he was 13 when I cast him. It took us so long to get
Wow.
the movie made, but he was originally supposed to be even younger in the movie. And so, you know, we sort of had a two-part audition. I heard about him. I'd seen him in a colleague's film when he was 11.
Wow.
And I just thought, oh, that kid's amazing, but he's too young. And then it just took me so long to get the movie made that all of a sudden he was the right age. And it just so happened that he'd been playing basketball for so long. So we did an audition, you know, standard acting audition. And then he and I went out and played. And it was so helpful because I could see what he was good at. And then I could see specific, and he was great. But there were also specific areas that I knew that I wanted to look better on screen. So then we just put him with the basketball trainer, and he got to, which for him was great because he was already playing. He's like, wait,
Mm-hmm.
now I get to go train for a movie, but also to
Right.
be a better player.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to work on those things ahead of time, and we were just fortunate to find someone who actually, you know, had experience on set, because I think had we cast a basketball player, not only would we be potentially ruining eligibility, but also like that's a lot to learn, you know, to be on
Yeah.
set all of those hours and day after day, and like have all that pressure on you. So we were fortunate to find someone who actually had experience doing both.
That's dope. And how did you, and then in terms of bringing that to screen and making everything work in this weird, like dance, so to speak, on screen, how does that work? Like, do you have to hire someone who almost choreographs where everyone's supposed to land in different shots? Like, I mean, if you take a 3-pointer from one shot and then they have to repeat the same shot, and then it's like all these different angles, how does that come to fruition?
It was a huge challenge. Normally, sports movies have a budget of many larger factors than ours.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't really have money for a basketball coordinator. So what we did is we rehearsed. Actually, I played the character in our initial rehearsals. The DP had a camera, and I would go do all the things that Michael was going to do until Michael hit the ground, and then we subbed him in. But there's funny rehearsal footage where I'm doing the plays or the spin move or whatever.
Oh my God.
And that was hard to direct too, because I'm like, okay, I need to view playback because I have no idea how that looked. But it was really hard because yes, it's exactly like choreography. It's like a dance, and I knew that I could choreograph the principal players in any scene, but we still would have 8-7 other players on the court. So we did hire a local basketball coach, high school basketball coach, to be the basketball coordinator, but he'd never been a basketball coordinator before. So it was more about like, just make sure the guys in the background are running a play and aren't just like standing there and kind of call attention to it and ruin the shot. One of the main problems we had with this choreography was sometimes we didn't have enough extras in the gym. So we would have choreographed it where we're going to pan from here to there. And then we get there on the day and realize we didn't have enough, there's no one in the gym. So we can't pan from here to there. You know, we have to make it a cut and put all our extras behind the character here, and then move them all over there. And so there were a lot of challenges to doing a sports movie on a smaller scale that in addition to your normal trying to make a sport look realistic, you know, whether it was number of extras or just the amount of time you have to stage things. And yeah, it was really hard, but it was also, it was a fun challenge. And I think one of the things that, you know, being passionate about basketball from the beginning, I think allowed us to sort of persevere and at least get them in the can, even if we weren't really going to be able to have our druthers about getting it the way we wanted to.
Right. Yeah. And did you have to storyboard this when you were developing the script? How did that look like from development?
I never did any storyboards, but in prep, we would go and basically choreograph a shot, even if it was just with an iPhone or a DSLR or something, where we'd get a couple of people out there and sort of just, it's almost like previs, you know, we were almost just mocking up what it was going to be, because so many of the shots have a progression, and that's hard to show in a storyboard. You know, if it starts here and goes there, whether it's panning, you know, all that sort of stuff can get beyond what a specific one frame of a storyboard looks like. So we tried to pre-visit as much as possible, but we also didn't really necessarily know all of our locations and number of extras. So there was a lot of thinking on our feet and, you know, going to plan B or plan C to try to get the action. And that's one of the reasons why some of those shots are continuous, is because we wouldn't have had time to set it up as like 8 different shots from a storyboard. You know, we had to just pan here to there to there to the hoop, and then move on.
Yeah. How does the DP, I don't even know how it works with a DP shooting these types of films. Like, are they running around? Like, are they behind on top of the nets? Like, where are they?
We did everything. We had a dolly. We made like a rickshaw, like a 3-wheel thing. My DP was on what we called a butt dolly, which is basically just a stool with wheels on the bottom. What else did we do? We had a steady cam. Then we put the steady cam on the dolly. So we were basically trying all sorts of different ways to keep the camera in motion, because I felt like most basketball movies I'd seen were shot from the spectators' point of view. You know, they were with long lenses from the sidelines and simulated what it was like to watch basketball. But because this entire movie is from the kid's point of view, and he's in every single scene and it's his perspective, I wanted the camera to be as close to him as possible and to be in the middle of the floor, which then gets more dangerous from like a choreography standpoint. So, you know, we try to pad the dolly in case anyone ran into it, and then we'd run through the action at a quarter speed and then half speed and then try to go full speed. And some of that was pretty time consuming, and ultimately a lot of, I think we had, you know, plans to do more, but it was fun to get the camera out there and to move it in every way possible. And had we had a bigger budget, I'm sure we would have had cable cams and, you know, high speed doggy cams and all sorts of stuff. But, you know, maybe one day in a different film.
Different film. No, I feel that. Well, that leads us to, my next question about working with Netflix, because my understanding is that Netflix acquired it during the script stage. And I'm curious to know, firstly, how that even came to be, like how that pitch went when you were pitching it to Netflix, or if they came to you, and if you felt like you had to compromise anything in your creativity because it was acquired by Netflix.
So, the interesting thing is this was at the beginning when Netflix was just getting into making movies. I think I come out of the Sundance Lab in 2014. And at the time they had done Orange is the New Black and House of Cards. Like they'd done series, but they hadn't done original movies yet. Or they had maybe done like an Adam Sandler movie. They'd done like a bigger movie or two, but not like an indie. And part of the challenge for me with trying to get this movie made is like sports movies are usually sold based around the coach. And if it's like The Blind Side, it's like Sandra Bullock, The Blind Side, right? And I really didn't want to make a white savior movie, and but at the same time, the kid who's being projected to be the next LeBron James, like white kids and Asian kids are not being projected to be the next LeBron James, was not going to be like an established actor that you could sell the movie around. And thankfully, Michael Rainey Jr. is like much better known now, right? But it wasn't like, he wasn't Sandra Bullock, right? So
he was not.
I was having a really hard time getting interest in financing the movie, and because traditionally movies go to like the art house theater on the Upper West Side, which is a specific audience demographic, and if that's if that's how these movies are funded, then my movie was not going to reach that audience. And that was what was great about Netflix, is they said, well, wait a second, this is an underserved market. Like we have subscribers of all races, of all geographies, of all ages. And this movie maybe doesn't fit into the traditional independent film finance model of like selling foreign territories with, but we think that because it is of a certain genre that it can find an audience on Netflix. So it was sort of like I had a lot of, several years of not getting the movie made and being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And then when they decided they were going to start making movies, then suddenly I was in the right place at the right time. And I wouldn't say that I made a lot of creative compromises on this movie, but I wouldn't say that they were because of Netflix. Like they give creators a lot of freedom, and they're sort of famous for doing so. It was more, it's more just like in the industry, you have to get a movie cast. You have to, I think there are expectations, and one of the challenges that I had was I think that there's not a lot of crossover between like an independent film audience and a sports movie audience. This is like somewhere in the middle, and that Venn diagram might not have a lot of overlap. So I had versions of the movie that veered more towards like an indie character study, and I had versions that veered more towards like a traditional sports movie. And a lot of the compromises were in trying to find a middle ground that was going to work for a larger audience than like the 6 people that happen to love both of those things equally. But no, Netflix, they were great.
They're great. Okay, that's good. Were there any sports drama films that you've watched in the past that inspired you, that you drew any inspiration from?
Oh gosh. That was one of the reasons I wanted to make a basketball movie, is I felt like if I set out to make like a, mob drama or something, it's like, okay, great. What are you going to do? Like The Godfather exists, Whereas for basketball movies, I felt like, well, like maybe the best basketball movie is like a documentary, like Hoop Dreams. And there are comedies like White Men Can't Jump, or, but like a character study from a kid's point of view, maybe there's room to do something there, but growing up, I think the movie I saw more than any other was White Men Can't Jump, for sure, which was hilarious.
So good. I might rewatch that actually, now that you mentioned that. But yeah, and I just feel like this must have been all very daunting, considering the fact that this was your first feature, like being situated in being an indie, but also working with Netflix, and also being a sports drama and developing all of this. What resources do you feel like you had that were able to supplement your confidence in bringing the story to life? Because I feel like just every day I would have been like, how is this happening? Where am I?
I was like that every day. When we wrapped production, I moved out of the apartment I was staying in, and the bathroom was white, and I looked and like all of my hair had fallen out. Like
Oh no,
literally,
not your
like
hair.
it was like the most stressful thing imaginable.
Oh
And I
no.
think the good point about that is, I think because it was such an ambitious project for all the reasons you just nailed, I wish that I'd had more experience going into it,
Mm,
like
mm,
more on-set experience. Like the short amateur was the first time I'd ever had my name on a slate in a DP. Everything I'd done up until that point was just me shooting it myself and like not really having any other departments.
mhm.
And so the ability to communicate what you're looking for from those departments and to be in charge of a crew of 50 people, and also just to when you meet with resistance to what you're trying to do creatively, to know how to navigate that.
Mhm.
I wish that I had done more like smaller scale productions, whether those were shorts, whether that was a web series, whether that was like a micro budget feature. A lot of filmmakers learn a lot from their first feature, and I was no different. But mine, because it was a Kickstarter project and because it was a Netflix movie, like I
Mhm.
knew that it wasn't just something that I was going to put in a drawer. I couldn't just like come out of it and say, well, I learned a lot, but thankfully no one's going to see it, right?
Right. Yeah,
Like I
yeah,
knew a
yeah.
lot of people were going to see it, so that increased the pressure. And ultimately, like however you can get your first feature made, get it made, because it's such a learning experience, and there's nothing about it that I think film school or no film school can
Hey.
teach you. It's like you have to go do it and experience it, and then hopefully we all become better filmmakers as a result of having that learning experience.
Yeah, for sure. Do you see yourself working on, because I mean, this is a huge part of your life, but the other huge part of your life is no film school. So you're not only a filmmaker, but you're also a film community builder and engager. And how have you felt as though like those two have like intertwined throughout the years? Because New Film School was still growing from 2010 to 2018, and it still continues to grow. So how have you been able to balance those two?
It's been a juggling act, and I don't know that I'm necessarily as good at it as I would like.
Mm-hmm.
I guess one example I would say is that during the quarantine, being stuck at home as we all are, the way that I found that I could separate the two is I set up a second desk, and I
Mm.
use one desk for all the no film school stuff, and I use a different desk for all of my screenwriting. And I approach screenwriting as the first thing I do in the day, and I write until I'm tired. And I really can't write 8 hours a day every day. So at some
Mm-hmm.
point in the afternoon, I realize that the ideas that are coming out of my head are worse than they were earlier in the day. And then I'll go to the other desk and work on no film school stuff. So I try to keep them separated, because for me, it's more about the mental space of being a storyteller and what are you thinking about when you're going on a run or taking a shower or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, and I want to make sure I'm thinking about stories and how I feel about the world and what my voice as a filmmaker is, more so than like there's that fire that we've got to put out at no film school.
Right.
So I literally just try to separate the two, and hopefully they
Yeah.
dovetail and help each other, because I certainly learned a lot by going to festivals and by interviewing filmmakers and
Mm-hmm.
all that sort of stuff. But um, yeah, I try to juggle them. I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is. I think we all have
No,
things that we are
yeah,
juggling.
yeah, that's true. We are all juggling, especially in the Corona era.
Yeah.
Well, Nevin, do you want to open this up to general
Yeah,
Q&A?
we'd love to. If anybody in the audience has any questions they want to ask Ryan, feel free to put them in the chat. Or also you can raise your hand with the raise hand function, and we can let you ask the question live. I guess, here we go. We have one from Jay. He's wondering, as a former sports agent, you nailed the subtleties of the world. Congrats. Josh Charles was terrific as the coach. How did casting him come about?
Ooh, that was a journey. That was a long journey. So I learned a lot I'd never worked with established actors before. And in writing the movie, one of the challenges, as I said to Saidah earlier, was like, it's from the kid's point of view, but the most recognizable actor is going to be someone else, not the lead of the movie. And it's like a low budget film. So it was in some cases a tough sell to try to find someone to play the coach. And thankfully, you know, I sort of learned to do my research, and I was looking around at actors that I admired, and I was reading about Josh leaving his TV show, The Good Wife. And he said, you know, I love playing this role for all those years, but I'm interested in going and doing different roles and independent roles. And then separately, I knew that he was a big sports guy because he's always on Instagram with, you know, Baltimore sports teams. So I said, okay, this guy is out there saying he wants to do independent films, more interesting movies. Hopefully having done a TV show for several years means that he's, you know, taken care of financially, because we're not exactly bringing a lot to the table here. And he's a sports fan. So maybe that would interest him in doing this movie, because it's a tough sell to be, he's a first-time director. It's a low-budget movie, and we shot it in Colorado, so you're not going to be at home with your family. So, you know, there's a lot to venture as an experienced actor. And thankfully, we sent it to Josh, and he was interested, and he was, you know, super into the sports aspect. Like, he and I went to high school games and locker rooms together and met with a, you know, a coach that he knows. And so he got into the research process, and hopefully that authenticity comes through in his performance.
Oh, Nevin, I think you're muted.
Sorry, I was muted there. Awesome. Kelly has a question that deals more with the script development. She's wondering, how did you get the script in front of Netflix?
So that was a result of being selected for the Sundance Screenwriters Lab. After the Screenwriters Lab later on in the year, they sort of have a continuum of support, similar to how IFP supports their projects. Mm-hmm. And actually, I think IFP introduced me to Sundance.
Ooh, shout out.
If I don't recall. Yeah, shout out IFP. Mm-hmm. And so I met a producer through Sundance, and he was taking, Jason Berman was taking the project around to different financiers, where we were sort of running into the problems I was just talking about with, like, well, this doesn't fit the traditional model, and, like, you know, the casting aspects of it. And so that was when Netflix started making movies. I think the fact that this movie had the pedigree of being a Sundance Labs project, and the fact that there was a short, right, that the executives there could go look at, allowed them to say, okay, this guy Ryan, plus his short, plus the Sundance Labs, plus our, like, established audience, you know, this could be successful for us. So my producer brought it over to them.
How long did it take for them to say yes? Like, if you went there on Monday and pitched, like, how long does that take? Is that a month? Is that, like, months, weeks?
Oh my God, someone's knocking on my door right now, and they've just knocked a third time.
Oh,
should I?
Yeah.
2 seconds. Okay. I'll be right.
Yeah. We got time. Also, everyone, Ryan's in, he made a sound studio in his closet. So this is really exciting.
All right.
Go away. I think it was just telling everyone about your sound studio you built.
Yes, This is my closet. This is my quarantine project. Try to make it some.
So productive, honestly. Oh yeah. So what was I saying? Oh yeah, about how long it takes between pitching your project to Netflix and actually getting the yes.
Oh my goodness. So thanks to places like IFP, I pitched this project a lot. And I kept a little spreadsheet of everyone I pitched it to, and to try and stay in touch and follow up, and who was interested and who was not. Mm-hmm. And over 5 years, I pitched it to 80 different producers and production companies. So Netflix was the 80th or maybe the 79th.
Wow.
And I was just so accustomed to either not hearing no, or just, like, being ghosted, you know, like, I sent you the script, what happened? And then nothing, that I wasn't really prepared to hear yes. So we had sent the script to Netflix. They had watched the short. I went over for a meeting with them, talked about my vision for the film, you know, visually, who I would see in the cast. And then they turned to my producer and said, let's talk deal points. And I was like, wait, what? Like,
come again?
Like, that's that. like, you want to make this movie? Because I don't know what to do now. I'm used to taking my water bottle and going home. So yeah, so that happened quickly after they'd read the script. But then the challenge for us was finding the cast and locking in the location. And so actually, from the time that Netflix financed it to the time we shot it was an entire year, because we knew we had to shoot it in the summer when kids are out of school and gyms are empty. So if we missed our window that summer, and I think they financed it in the summer, then we had to wait for the next one. And so yeah, it took a year, but that was casting and time of year scheduling dependent.
Right. All right. Cool.
Awesome. We have another question. This one's from Connie. She's wondering, what was your collaboration process with your editor? She really liked the slow motion perspective, really concentrated on the game. And she also says, thank you.
Oh, thank you. I met with my editor here in LA, and he was a lifelong basketball fan. So that was where we started. The fact that he had really good tickets to the Lakers games also might have played a role in convincing me to collaborate with him. But yeah, I mean, I wanted to separate the world of basketball from the world. I wanted to separate my protagonist's life on the court from his life off the court. So we shot the stuff on the court with completely different lenses than we did with off the court. We did a lot of slow motion on the court. It basically was supposed to be like, on the court, it feels like a movie, blockbuster, and off the court, it feels like a documentary. And so my producer introduced me to the editor, and at first I thought maybe he can be editing during the filming and I'll be looking at scenes, but filming was just such a crazy, I just didn't have any extra time. So we really didn't start until afterwards. And I had actually never worked with an editor before. I got my start as an editor, and I had always edited my own material. And so I wasn't sure how that was going to work, but coming off of the movie, I was so exhausted that I was just so happy to have a collaborator who could be implementing my ideas. And the fact that I could lie down and be horizontal on a couch instead of like sitting at the computer doing it. That was, I think, hopefully we all have great experiences in editing because it's so much more controlled than the chaos of production and where everything can go wrong. And yeah, Jeff Wishengrad, my editor here, was just a lovely person to work with. And thankfully, Murphy's Law applies way more to production than it does to editing. So that was a great collaboration.
Alvaro, I was wondering, could you also talk about your collaboration with your composer?
Yes. Interestingly, the whole movie was about trying to get into the kid's head. And it was funny because Michael is way younger than I am. And so he would listen to completely different music than I listened to many years ago when I was on the team van, right? So I was always asking him to throw stuff my way. And we didn't have a lot of money for like needle drops, for cues. But also I wanted to do something that was in his head. So I wanted this score it was like an original hip hop score, but most scores are not that because they're usually needle drops. Like they play songs in movies. They're not like compositions of original music. So I was just trying to find composers who were interested, and BC Smith had never done really any kind of hip hop score before, but he'd done like every kind of music imaginable, from classical to like atonal, experimental stuff and so I guess I sent a couple scenes to a few composers and just wanted to see how they responded to the character emotionally and what they would sketch out for him. And BC really got it. And that was just a great experience because there's an hour of original music in the movie. There's like 30 something cues, and that's way more music than is usually in a movie. And a lot of it comes really forward in the film, like during the mix, during basketball, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I loved working with him, and he had never done anything in that genre before, but just the fact that he seemed to get the character and really respond emotionally to him, led me to believe that if we needed to bring on like separate drum programmers or something to work with him, we could do that. But that, the key thing was that he understood the emotional journey of the character.
Cool. This question is coming from Joji. He says, "Hi Ryan, thanks for this. Fellow 3-time Sundance Lab reject here. So with a successful short and multiple script rewrites, do you have thoughts on making the 4th time stand out?"
Yeah, I mean, yes. Well, congratulations on your 3rd rejection. I too was rejected 3 times, I believe. There was one year where I didn't hear back, so I assumed they got it, but I just didn't get in. So I was rejected either 2 or 3 times. I'm not sure. The big difference for me was the short. I applied with a script, and I had previously directed a web series, but it had nothing to do with basketball. So there was nothing in my director's reel that would show that my grasp of the material or the world. So I got rejected from the lab and, rewrote the script several times, and got rejected from the lab and rewrote the script several times. And then the year I got in was the year after I had released the short. So I know that played a big difference in them being able to see what I was going for, not just to read it. And so I definitely recommend everyone make a short. And different people have had different strategies. Some people have taken a scene verbatim from their feature and made it into a short. I mean, that's how Whiplash got made, is he took a scene from his feature, made it, the short got into Sundance, and then, that scene is basically in the feature with the, better budget, and it looks different, but it's the same scene on the page. And for me, I because my movie was from one character's point of view, there were all these other characters that I had researched that I thought were interesting, and that I thought if I made them the protagonist of the short, that it could be a sort of a separate look at something. And that's how that came about. So I definitely encourage you to make a short, demonstrate something that you think is going to help show your grasp of the material in your screenplay, and also keep applying. I mean, we all get rejected from stuff all the time, and the things that we get into go on our resume, and the things that we get rejected from never do. So, and if you've made a short before, which I think I saw just chatted, then, I'd do another draft and I'd apply, or I might write something else too, and apply with that. But also it's not the end all be all if you don't get into the Sundance Lab, right? Just as it's not the end all be all if you don't get into the Sundance Film Festival. I think as long as we are all getting better at our craft, we will get to where we want to go, and it might be via a different method, or it might not be via the established methods.
Awesome. Cool. So I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions. Got a question from Connie, and then Eric has a great final question for us. Connie's wondering, how long did it take you to write the script? And do you have any writing tips?
It took me forever to write the script. I had the idea in 2010, and we shot it in 2016. So there's like literally hundreds of files in my script folder. But that was necessary because that was me learning how to be a screenwriter. It wasn't learning how to write this one script. You could write 5 drafts of 10 scripts, or you could write 500 drafts of 1 script. I mean, there are different methods to it. So this one took me forever. And since then, I think we all get better at it. I don't think it would take me that long to write the script again, but hopefully if I wrote it again, it would also be better. I mean, so yeah, I was writing for years and years, and essentially I would write a draft and then put it aside for a while and then come back to it and get feedback from people. I mean, always send it to people and get their notes. So you don't have to take their notes, but you've got to get out of your own head. So, and then during production, I was rewriting it because of locations, because of characters, for whatever it was. I mean, I was rewriting the script throughout shooting it, which I don't recommend. And it's also one of the reasons why I realize sometimes writers and directors are different people, because if you're directing all day, the writer could be working on the script. But instead, if you are the writer director, you have to come back after your 16-hour day and then sit there and write for 5 hours, and that can be rough.
Do you have a writer's routine? Like, are you someone who's like, all right, I'm at my writer's desk for 2 hours in the morning kind of thing. I'll work on film school during the day, and then at nighttime go? Or are you like sporadic when the ideas come? Like,
yeah, it's the opposite. I first thing I do every day is write, and I write as long as I can until at some point in the afternoon when I'm less effective. But I find that the headspace that you're in is the most important thing. And by the end of the day, I have so many things swirling around that I wanted to accomplish or didn't accomplish, or, you know, things that I need to do tomorrow, that if I write first thing, then I'm in a sort of cleaner headspace. And so that's my routine is, you know, get up, have breakfast, write. And then at some point in the afternoon, I'll switch over to other things. And there are times where I'll write all day and all night. You know, if you're trying to make a deadline, if you have a specific push on something. But other than that, it's usually, you know, maybe 2/3 of the day is writing and 1/3 is other stuff.
Awesome, cool. Well, that leads us into our final question of the night, which is from Eric. He's wondering, what's the next project you're working on, and where do you kind of see yourself going in the next 3 to 5 years creatively?
So, you know, it's interesting. Like, I think Saidah and I were talking about this a bit before, but I made this movie because I was so in love with basketball, and I really missed it during quarantine, by the way. I was in a league, and then, you know, we just had to stop, and like, maybe they'll come back in a year or something, who knows? But I think when I set out to make Amateur, I didn't really know how to tell my own story, in terms of what I'd seen on screen, because I'm a biracial Asian American who grew up in the South, and like, I certainly haven't seen that in the movies before. And I just didn't even think that could be a movie. And thankfully, I think, you know, culture has changed, and we've had movies like Crazy Rich Asians and The Farewell, and there are things on TV where it's like, oh, maybe I can actually tell this story. So I've been thinking, and also I think you have to get to a certain age to like reflect on your own existence, you know, whereas maybe I was interested in a basketball movie because I could reflect on who I was when I was 14 or something, but this is like a more serious thing. So I think the positive thing about organizations like IFP, and I mean, we also try to play our part at No Film School, is, you know, encouraging people to tell their own story. And I didn't really think I could before. And now that's something that I've been thinking a lot about and working on. So we'll see. I mean, it's, I think, you know, it used to be that I would see being something different or unique as an obstacle. And now I think that's an asset, and for all of us. So yeah, that's what I'm working on. Family stuff.
Well, thanks so much for joining us tonight, Ryan. And thank you to everyone who attended tonight. Such a strange time. So wonderful to just sort of connect over, you know, movies and stuff. So thank you so much. Yeah.
And I just want to quickly plug Ryan's case study podcast. If anyone wants to learn more about how to make their first feature, it's called The First Feature on SoundCloud. Didn't want to take your whole spiel, but I figured the people would want to know if they didn't have.
Yeah, so if you want like 10 more hours of me blabbing, we did a podcast at No Film School, it's called The First Feature. As Saidah said, you can find it on SoundCloud. Basically, each episode is like a different stage of production. So I learned so much making this movie that I wish I knew at the beginning, and I wanted to create an asset or a resource that you could listen to if you're going into production on your own first feature. And it's something that I'm going to listen to when I make my second one, you know, because I don't want to make the same mistakes twice. So yeah, you can just search for The First Feature, No Film School, and there's an episode on screenwriting and prep and directing and cinematography and editing and all those things. Yeah, so that's where all that stuff lives. But thank you guys for having me here.
Thank you for being here, and I hope everyone has a lovely rest of their day, lovely rest of their week, and catch you guys on the flip side.
Have a great night.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.